Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldsschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Manic Expression, the Comic Book Cast, the Reopen Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida Facebook page, the PlayStation Let's Play channel, and for entertainment's sake.
Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side. When I paid a visit, while it's possible I missed it, it seemed different yet exactly the same. Till further notice, I'm in between, from where I'm standing, my grass is green. Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side.
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia and we're continuing As Told by Ginger Month with an interview. You may know her as the person who runs the As Told by Ginger Reviewed blog over at the website astoldbygingerreviewed.blogspot.com. This person has been reviewing every single episode of As Told by Ginger and giving her critiques on the good and the bad. She's known online as Deebiedoobie, but I have here Michelle. Michelle, welcome to Casual Chats.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, right before we discuss about your website and how you got into reviewing every single episode of As Told by Ginger, tell me about what made you get started in doing writing in general?
I've been writing for as long as I can remember. As little, all I've ever wanted to do was write. Actually, the first thing I wanted to do was be an artist, but ever since I started writing, I just continued and started writing books, and I would read them to my class, and it just turned into from a hobby to something I want to do for pretty much the rest of my life.
And which authors gave you the inspiration to do your writing?
Well, actually, when I was in second grade, Barbara Park, the author of the Junie B. Jones series, was probably...
Yeah, I've heard of that book series, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I used to read those books a lot in second grade. It was actually when I really started writing, and I really liked the writing style. It was really snarky. It was really loud and really in your face, for a second grader at least. So I decided, hey, I want to try to do something like that. So I started writing a little bit in that style with a little bit of snark, and I guess that's where it led me today.
How has your writing progressed over the years when reading those books from second grade, and then eventually how your writing style is today?
Well, my writing style has changed dramatically, especially from high school into college. The books that I used to write when I was little, they kind of resembled diary entries where I would have a situation and it would just be walking through the situation, and it was very simple. And then when I was into about high school is when I really started to progress with my writing. I started to create more adult situations, and that's also when I first started my novel Colorless Rainbows, which I've been writing since high school. And it's very dark and very edgy, so I guess it just progressed from childish situations to more adult ones with more complex storylines, more complex characters.
And were you able to take what you learned in being a writer all the way from, high school to college and even today, were you able to take that and integrate it into your blog?
Oh, yes. I especially learned from other blogs that I've been reading too. Full House Reviewed especially was a big influence in my writing. That's actually how I got started on my own blog, As Told by Ginger Reviewed.
And will you tell us a little bit more about Full House Reviewed for those who don't know about it?
Full House Reviewed is a blog reviewing every single episode of Full House. Started by the alias Billy Superstar. He's been writing it since 2011 and recently just started reviewing the Untold Full House story that premiered on TV. I forgot which channel. I especially loved his writing style whenever he would review every episode of Full House, all the snark, all the sarcasm, and all the jokes towards the really annoying characters. And that's really where I got my inspiration from to start my blog, from his reviews.
And you have your username, Deebiedoobie. Is that correct? Am I pronouncing it correct?
Right.
Where did the name come from?
To be honest, I really don't have an origin for it. It just came to me. I tend to make up words on my own. It's just one of those words that I just started saying randomly, and it just sounded interesting, so I decided to use it.
Very interesting. And so, when deciding on doing the As Told by Ginger Reviewed blog, I take it that for, you as a fan, were you a bit afraid at first to be kind of like reviewing it, as opposed to like watching it, like if you were a fan of the show, especially like looking at the show and maybe critiquing it, and, were you afraid of maybe that your opinions would change about the show, or you just wanted to review it just strictly as someone who wanted to start reviewing and somebody who wanted to increase the skills of writing?
That's actually very interesting, because I actually was kind of afraid that my opinion would change, because I know I haven't seen every episode, and I knew that I hadn't really looked at the show that in depth. And so when I started actually reviewing it and started actually writing about all the characters, I started to think sometimes the show wasn't as great as I thought it was, and sometimes the show really surprised me at how deep it could go.
Yeah, it's definitely understandable, considering that Season 3 of As Told by Ginger never was showcased in the US. It only showed in Canada. And even still to this day, it's never aired on TV. Maybe the Splat, which is T-Nick's way of replacing the 90s or all that, will do that, because at the time of this recording, they have showcased a few episodes of As Told by Ginger. And even though that you can see it on iTunes and Amazon, it's never had a TV release. In fact, it's kind of sad for me to say, I didn't see The Wedding Frame until, I think it was 3 years ago, but it was only when it was released on DVD. So it was really hard because the fact that it was the first 2 seasons was aired, and then the schedule changes happened in which it would air on Nickelodeon, then it aired on T-Nick, and then the scheduling conflictions happened where it would air during the afternoon, it aired at night, it aired on Sundays or Fridays or Saturdays, and then eventually they just didn't air it at all until, eventually it was uploaded to iTunes. And I can understand for some people, including yourself, on maybe you're afraid that the show wasn't going to be as good as it was, because out of all the Klasky Csupo Nicktoons, this is the one that is talked about the least. And a lot of people have a ton of critiques about it, saying about how ugly the animation is, it's too dramatic, the characters are cliche, it's not funny. So I can understand that, and that's why I've stated many times on my podcast or my videos or my blogs on why I think it's the most underrated Nicktoon ever made, because of how different it is. And we'll be discussing more in details on that. So going back into your blog, As Told by Ginger Reviewed, when starting it and, watching every single episode, what were the things that you were picking up when, starting on your reviews?
Well, at first I was noticing that As Told by Ginger was using some of the cliches of ordinary cartoons, such as I have a crush, I don't know what to do. But then as I started watching more and more episodes, I realized, hey, there are some things in here that's never really talked about. Like, in particular, during the episode where they have to watch the puberty video.
Oh, yes. I think it was it... I think I remember, but yeah, it was something, School Confidential or something like that?
Right.
Yeah.
I forgot too.
It's okay. Let me just pull up I actually have the recaps right here. What's it called again? Oh, Gym Class Confidential. That's what it's called. There we go. Which, interesting enough, that episode was actually one of the episodes that was ranked in the top 100 greatest Nicktoons moments. I think it was in either the 90s or number 80 or something like that. But yeah, that's actually a really interesting episode. Anyway, continue on.
Right, and what I especially noticed was the B plot with Carl and Hoodsie. Especially when Hoodsie was talking about how he was embarrassed to be showering with the other boys because he was embarrassed about how he looked naked. And then his mother, Joanne, would be telling him that it's perfectly natural to be ashamed of your naked self. And behind me laughing at how ridiculous that is, I realized that this isn't really something that's talked about, maybe because it's too mature for the target audience, or because it's just never been considered before. But I especially love that they actually went there, that they actually talked about Hoodsie's insecurities, and that he wasn't going to just take Joanne's advice and just hide himself. I really like that he actually stood up for himself at the very end and just decided to bear it all.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he stunk up the entire locker room because of the plot about him and Carl not showering, for the record.
Right, exactly. And, what's interesting about how you were able to say about that particular plot line of, being naked in front of people. I mean, many, any particular Nicktoon, especially around that time, they would have treated it as a joke. Like, there was an episode of The Fairly Odd Parents in which Timmy fell down into the swimming pool, and then all of his clothes were gone, and he just was really embarrassed about that, or, any episode involving with, like, comedic, gags like maybe Rocko's Modern Life or SpongeBob, in which, the person's naked, he's gonna be embarrassed, but they never really delve into, how the person is feeling subjectively when it comes to how their appearance is. And that's one of the good things about As Told by Ginger, is that it does teach a lot of lessons, and it does talk about a lot of topics that none of the Nicktoons at the time did. Around the 90s, the Nicktoons were mostly comedic based. And if there was any slice of life aspect, like, say, Rugrats, or Hey Arnold, or Rocket Power, or the Wild Thornberrys, they would play it more to the comedic aspect. There would be occasionally an episode in which, they're going to be learning a life lesson, or characters going through something dramatic, but As Told by Ginger basically, took it and was able to do a lot with it. And I think many people kind of found that a little bit off-putting, considering that wasn't a Nicktoon, that wasn't a show that, Nickelodeon did. You could also argue about Caitlin's Way, which was a live-action show that also took the dramatic aspect instead of focusing on the comedic aspect, like shows such as, Clarissa Explains It All, or Kenan and Kel, or all that, in which they were more comedy-based, and Caitlin's Way was more dramatic-based, in which those shows pretty much got ignored and were faded into obscurity. And, when you look back on it now, you are able to appreciate it because it took those risks, and it was able to talk to teenagers and to a down-to-earth perspective about this is how life is, and sometimes life isn't pretty. Sometimes life isn't perfect. Sometimes life can be messy, and sometimes, problems occur, and that's what they showcase, and they weren't afraid to share it with anybody.
Right. I've noticed that, especially with the newer shows that they're coming out with. They're either way too silly, or they don't take themselves seriously enough if they're trying to be serious.
Yeah, I think in recent years, shows are able to become a mixture of being both comedic and dramatic. Like, for example, again, Adventure Time, Steven Universe, and Gravity Falls are able to become comedic, but at the same time, they do have their dramatic moments. And, shows in that particular time period, like either the 90s or the 2000s, they were either comedic or they were either dramatic. And very rarely the dramatic thing happened. It was mostly the comedic, and if it was, dramatic, then it would only happen occasionally. And I'm glad that, the newer shows nowadays are able to take more risks, and they're able to showcase that, hey, we can be funny, but at the same time we can teach these dramatic life lessons that people can take away from.
Right. Although I haven't exactly seen many of the newer shows, I don't really watch much TV anymore, I can definitely see how they really expanded the kinds of things that they're showing. I mean, I've seen a few episodes of Steven Universe, the first few episodes, and I can see how it definitely differentiates itself from other cartoons that are shown now.
Right, and even live-action shows can also take that route, in which, a lot of people are getting into the more dramatic shows that have a lot of people who are not very perfect either, like Mad Men or Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, in which you have a lot of people who are mixed in personalities and they have their problems, they have their issues, and a lot of people can be able to relate to them, saying, you know, this person can be a jerk in real life, but for some reason I can kind of see what they're going through. So,
Right.
I mean, with, people, for example, like Miranda or like Courtney or even like Carl and Hoodsey, in which they're not exactly the best role models, but at the same time, you kind of understand on why they do what they do. And, like Carl, for example, you think that he's just a troublemaker, but deep down inside, he's very troubled in the fact that he never got over the fact that his parents got divorced. And even still, he kind of doesn't like his father. And every time that he tries to meet up with him, he has tried to find ways in which he completely ignored him because his father left him when he was young, and he felt that, hey, why should I care about him? He left us. He wasn't there for us. And same thing with Courtney, in which, she was a privileged child. She was rich, and she came from a rich family. Her family's constantly gone all the time. And at the same time, she doesn't flaunt it. She doesn't show off that, oh, I'm rich. I mean, maybe she does, but not objectively. She's still able to become friends with Ginger, who she finds fascinating because she does live this simple life of being kind of like lower middle class and not having a lot of money and items and stuff like that. And even something as simple as like front seas or having friends doing manicures and ponies in the shelves is like that interests her. And also in the one episode in which her mom is in the hospital, and then she has to spend time with Lois and Ginger, and she becomes more friends with Lois. The episode "Mommy Nearest," it's kind of like she's learning about all these things, and she's learning about, there's more to life than the life that was presented to me. And even with Hoodsey, in which you kind of see him in the beginning as like some lackey to Carl. He's more like the sidekick, but then he has his personal issues with, like you mentioned before in the episode, Gym Class Confidential, about having body issues and, kind of like feeling underappreciated at times, especially when Carl meets up with Noelle. And then later on, he starts getting a little bit more confidence throughout the later seasons in which they start going to middle school. So you kind of see that there is a bit of a progression, that these characters are not perfect, but you still kind of relate to them in some way.
Right.
All right, so continuing on with the questions. So, what is your favorite season of As Told by Ginger?
I would have to say season 3. And I know a lot of people who read my blog would probably think that's a crazy thing to say, because I've had so much criticism about season 3. But there's so many changes that happen, and it really progressed that season. So I wouldn't necessarily say the entire season 3 would be my favorite. I would say maybe the tail end of season 2 going into season 3, because it showed the most changes, and it showed, that just because you enter high school, it doesn't mean it's completely horrible or it's going to be completely great. I feel like it's the most realistic time in their lives.
Oh yeah, a great example on this is Butterflies Are Free, and that's actually my favorite episode of As Told by Ginger, because when you see through the beginning of that show, the TV movie, you see the beginning of the TV movie, and you see about how much things have progressed since then. Like, just a little moment that's one of my favorites was when Ginger looks at when Ginger looks at the picture of Ian in her locker, and she said, wow, I can't remember, I remember when I used to fall in love with Ian, but now I'm no longer falling in love with him. It's like, times have definitely changed since then. And also the same thing with Carl and Hoodsey bearing the petrified eyeball, which was it was all the way up to episode 1, in which that was like a major thing that you associate with them. And also, Macy becoming more confident in herself by having that makeover, Lois losing weight for the wedding, and, let's see what else. There was, and also the speech at the end, in which Ginger compares the middle school to high school students to butterflies, in which, you start as a cocoon, you start as a caterpillar, you're small, you're learning a whole bunch of things, and then you kind of like bring yourself inside the shell and then you blossom into a butterfly. And that was like probably like one of the, if not the best moments in the series. Basically, culminating together on what makes the show so great. And season 3, yes, I agree that season 3 is also a great season. Even though that it did have its fair share of misses, it tried to go a little bit too dramatic, and it tried to throw in a lot of plot points that didn't really add up. But it ended very well. In fact, I even tell myself this numerous times on podcasts and on my blog that if Avatar: The Last Airbender didn't exist, then As Told by Ginger hands down would have had the best ending in Nickelodeon history. Now, who are your favorite characters in As Told by Ginger?
My absolute favorite character would have to be Carl.
Ah, that's a good choice, yeah. I can definitely see that.
He's just this little naughty little kid with this heart of gold, and as cliche as it sounds, he's just the perfect character to exhibit all those qualities that everyone loves about him. He's like this kid who wants to, prank everybody. He wants to make himself known, but at the center of it all, he's just very loving. He's very altruistic. And he always just wants to look out for the best of everybody, even for Joanne. I mean, as much as Joanne hates him, he always tries to get on her good side. And you kind of get the feeling that he doesn't really care that Joanne doesn't really like him back. He just wants to make it known that he is a good kid, despite being a little runt sometimes.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. In fact, the list that I posted like 3 or 2.5 years ago, it's pretty dated now, but I still kind of stand of Carl being one of the best male role models in Nickelodeon because, yes, he is the typical, rambunctious little brother character, but at the same time, he does have a determination of being good, and he does have some ways in which he can be able to showcase that, he's not a bad kid. He's just a kid. And that's one of the good things about it. He's relatable. And he's not like the perfect kid, but he's not the kid who's constantly annoying. And that's why I really like the character so much. Anybody else?
Especially like Lois.
Oh, I love Lois. Yeah, I really love Lois. I wrote down a list of the top 10 Nickelodeon moms, and Lois was number 1, because she's a great character, but I'll explain more about it. Go ahead. Why do you like the character?
She just has some of the best advice. She's just so real. And actually, I was considering making a top 10 or top 5 list of best Lois quotes, and actually, one of my favorite quotes from her is from the episode Stuff Will Kill Ya.
Oh, yes.
When she catches Ginger drinking all the coffee, and she tries to tell her, if our ifs and nuts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a very Merry Christmas. That was just one of my favorite quotes from her.
That's great.
It just came out of her so flawlessly. And she just gives some of the best advice I've ever heard. She's so down to earth. She's so real. And she really cares about her kids. It's not like she's some of these other Nickelodeon moms who's very negligent, very, silly just to get a laugh out of the kid. She's a very real mom. Just the little details, too. Like, I forgot which episode it was. She was sitting on the opposite side of Ginger's door, and she was trying to give her advice, and she was getting up, and she's like, oh, my back. I just love those little details. It just makes her so real.
Yeah, it does really make her real. Because of the fact that, just like you said before about, the typical Nickelodeon moms, about how they're either non-existent, they're played as really goofy, or they're dead. So having somebody like Lois in which she can give advice and she's not afraid of, speaking her mind, as opposed to like some people in which, they just don't care, or, they would just ignore the child. But no, Lois is able to give Ginger great advice, and she's able to, do things like, she would able to discipline Carl whenever he gets out of control. And, just like you said before, the advice that was given was, really excellent, considering the fact that I've seen a lot of quotes on Tumblr in which they would, kind of like put in about, this quote that Lois said, it really touched me. It's like, why can't they do this in real life and stuff like that? And I don't know what my favorite quote of As Told by Ginger is from Lois, but there's a lot of them that, when she says it, it's like, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Let's see. What are your favorite episodes of As Told by Ginger?
Well, my number one favorite episode is A Lesson in Tightropes.
Oh, that's a pretty dramatic one. Go ahead.
I mean, despite that it is melodramatic, I will admit, it has a lot of smaller plots woven into it that really define everybody's situations, and the way that it's executed, it just couldn't have been more perfect. Well, it could have been maybe a little longer, that's about it, but we all know that can't happen. But I just love all the subplots that tied into Ginger's issue, especially with Lois and Jonas getting back together as friends, and Carl being afraid that this will be the point where his parents will come back together, and then he'll lose that relationship with Dr. Dave, and he'll have to accept this father that he's shunned all his life. And that's pretty heavy stuff for someone like Carl. Or pretty heavy stuff for anybody, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree.
And especially when Jonas showed up and he had that talk with Dr. Dave about how he was telling him that he's a better man than he is. I just thought that was really heart-wrenching. I mean, we don't know Jonas's backstory. We don't know the exact reason why he left, so I can only feel sorry for him at this point.
Yeah, and I think it was able to elevate itself even more in the episode 10 Chairs, in which Ginger invites Jonas over for Thanksgiving, and then it just becomes even more awkward when Dr. Dave's mother comes along, and then, Carl tries to free a turkey because he wants to, he doesn't want to eat the turkey, and he wants the turkey to be free. And it just, the whole discussion of Dr. Dave's mom, and then Lois, then Lois doesn't realize that, Ginger invited Jonas, and then Dodie and Macy come along, and they just see how awkward everything's becoming. So, yeah, I mean, well, that's one of the good things about it, is that, not every day in Nickelodeon shows that you get to see something as something as serious as divorce. Well, which I take it that's, where Emily Kapnick, being a single mom herself, that's where she got a lot of her inspiration from when doing a lot of the episodes, especially when writing the character Lois, and the plots involving with, Lois and Jonas, and then eventually with maybe Lois getting together with Dr. Dave. So, once again, it's able to become very relatable to a lot of people, especially if they're going through that. And it's definitely... And the episode, A Lesson in Tightropes, in which Ginger gets her appendix removed, it actually does follow into the plot, as opposed to when the Wild Thornberrys did it, in which it was a Valentine's Day episode, and Eliza gets her appendix removed, and then they pretty much never talk about it again, and it doesn't really follow into the plot. Even though technically that episode came before A Lesson in Tightropes, it's actually a much better episode because of everything that happened afterwards, and it was able to play into the story. Anybody else? Any other episodes you want to talk about?
What episodes do I not want to talk about?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about. All right. Well, which episodes didn't you not really care about?
Well, episodes specifically with Dodie. At the worst.
I'm kind of conflicted with Dodie. It's like, I can see that she's trying to play as the typical gossipy girl, and she kind of, sometimes ruins things for her friends, but yeah, it's not exactly... I can understand why some people don't really like the character of Dodie and the episodes that do focus on her.
Well, throughout my blog, it would be clear that anyone would think that I would hate Dodie, but I actually love her as a character. As a person, I hate her, but as a character, I actually think she's fantastically written.
Yeah.
She's just very manipulative, and it's just the fact that Ginger and Macy stand by her throughout the entire series, no matter how many times where it would be logical to end their friendship. The next episode, they're just friends again, as if nothing happened. And that's something that I never understood, considering the show was very good about keeping plot lines consistent and keeping things logic. Yeah, I never understood why.
I can kind of see what they're trying to pull off. A person has many issues. There are so many people that there's at least one person in your life when especially if you're going to school. There's that one person that you kind of don't like because they do a lot of things that are, that would be considering like friendship breaking, but at the same time, they just have a good enough heart and they just have a good enough spirit in which you kind of still are friends with them. You can't explain on why, you can't explain on how you're able to sustain it, but in a way, you're able to become that forgiving in which you can be able to stay friends with a person. And maybe it won't be a good example about how Dodie is as a character, but I think it's how humble that Ginger and Macy are, in which, yes, Dodie has issues. Yes, Dodie has manipulated numerous times. Yes, Dodie is willing to do anything to become popular. But at the same time, it's like, we see our friends' flaws. I mean, every single character, let's be honest, they have major issues. Like, with Macy not being able to have a normal upbringing because her parents are psychiatrists, and, ironically, they're child psychiatrists, but they don't know anything about raising their daughter, and they kind of treat her like a child when her birthday comes around. And with Ginger's case, in which she wants to become popular in the beginning, and then she kind of has her issues about having a family because her father's not around, and, later on throughout the series in which, Dr. Dave comes into her life, she kind of misses her being around with her father, and she wants to have the family back together again. So it's like, every character has their issues, and I'm glad that the three of them are able to see through their flaws in which they can be able to work things out. And it could have been an easy thing to just break them out, and maybe deservingly, they should have broken out their friendship with Dodie a long time ago. But I think it's because that each and every single one of them don't have... each and every single one of them are not perfect, and they know that, Dodie's a good person, even though that she has issues, but I think they're able to work around that.
I mean, I feel like in some cases, Dodie can be pretty human. I mean, especially in 10 Chairs, when Ginger had told her that she invited Jonas over for dinner, and Dodie was actually the one who said, "Why are you doing that? That's crazy." And also there was the episode when Ginger found out that she was 1/4 Jewish and decided to devote her whole life to Judaism. And Dodie was actually the one who kind of made Ginger see that she was kind of going crazy, so...
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, you have moments in which, Ginger is able to become supportive for Dodie in the episode Lunatic Lake, in which Ginger knows that Joanne is insane and very uptight and overprotective, but she's able to stand by with Dodie because that's her best friend, and she's willing to put up with a lot of things just so they can have a good time, especially with, with Carl coming into the trip, with Joanne absolutely hating him. So, you know what, I mean, I can understand, for a lot of people, if you hate the character, it's understandable. For those who like the character, it's also understandable. So, take it for what it is. Another thing that I read on your blog, when looking into your discussions about the shows, is that you actually don't like Ginger and Darren being together. You actually were a little bit disappointed when they actually, spoilers who hadn't seen the final episode, when they actually get married at the end, and... So, would you like to explain on why you kind of felt let down?
I just kind of feel like they were kind of forced together for the fans' sake, because they've been best friends for so many years, so in the context of the show, it would make sense that they would start dating. But I honestly don't think that they're right for each other.
Right. When you say right, do you mean by they have nothing in common, or do you think they have no chemistry?
I honestly think they don't have much chemistry. They're great as best friends, and I think they should have left it at that.
I guess it's understandable. I actually really like them as a couple. I actually listed that as my top 5 favorite couples in Nickelodeon history because, you see, unlike other couples in which, they fall in love and, like, they're either best friends and then they just, one day it's like, oh, I love you. It's like, there's actually progression in Ginger and Darren's case. Dare I Darren was the first indication in which Ginger kind of has a crush on him. And then Far From Home was when Darren started building up his feelings towards Ginger, and then throughout the later parts of Season 2 and Season 3, they actually start going out with one another, and they break up, and then they get back together. You don't see that kind of progression even with good Nickelodeon shows. Like, for example, for Pete and Pete, you have Big Pete and Ellen, who start off as best friends, and then later on throughout the seasons, they start kind of having, like, a crush towards one another, and it's not really played up in pretty much any of the episodes, maybe with the exception of 2. And even with Avatar: The Last Airbender, you have the Cave of Two Lovers, and then they kind of put that off to the side because of the war, and then eventually in Season 3, they start, having their feelings towards one another. There's not exactly a lot of build-up. But at least with As Told by Ginger, they actually do have a progression in build-up. And maybe for a lot of people, they have the old saying, opposites attract, in which maybe there's a thing, maybe there's something about Ginger that Darren doesn't have, or something that Darren doesn't have that Ginger has, in which they can kind of be, 2 and 1 together. So I kind of see that, in which, Ginger and Darren both started off really unconfident about themselves. Ginger wants to become popular, Darren has the headgear. And then later on, Darren becomes more confident, in which, his headgear comes off, he becomes taller, he becomes more buffer, he starts playing football because his father and brother always constantly made fun of him of being this wimpy nerd. And Ginger becomes more confident in herself, in which she doesn't care about becoming popular, she just cares about who she is. So it's like they do, maybe not personality-wise, and maybe not, in having things in common-wise, they are suited for one another, but because they've been friends for so long, and because they went through similar things, they're able to build up feelings towards one another, and that's how, in the end, they're able to become married and have a child. But that's just my opinion. Your opinion can be completely different, and I can completely understand that.
I completely understand why some people would love them together, too. I personally think that they would be better off with different people, just because it's just a trope that I see on so many shows, and I was kind of disappointed that As Told by Ginger did this, that they kind of used, oh, we've been best friends for so long that we're destined to be soulmates. Well, it's definitely not true in real life, and As Told by Ginger, it's supposed to be one of those, slice-of-life shows with a lot of realistic situations. So I was kind of disappointed that they went that route.
Yeah, I guess I can see what you're going through. What made you come up with this suggestion and this opinion. I guess, maybe with Ginger and Orion, maybe it could have been decent, and so would Darren and Simone. But I guess maybe, if they would have had more episodes dedicated to that, I can see that, but it was only like the last 5 or 6 episodes throughout the series, and maybe if they would have played that like throughout an entire season, maybe it would have been built up a little bit more, but that's just nitpicking in my opinion, and I can see why some people was not really happy about seeing that cliched route, and maybe along the lines, maybe that was kind of like what it was, maybe the way that storytelling was portrayed at the time, I'm not sure, but I can see that. Anyway, just have a few more questions right before we conclude it. There have been a lot of discussions about reboots and revivals and continuations. Would you like to see As Told by Ginger have a continuation or a reboot or a remake? And if so, why? And if not, then why not?
Well, I would only support the reboot or a continuation if it was done by Classic Zeppo.
Klasky Chupo, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's
I can
really,
never pronounce.
not a lot of people can pronounce it, but it's pronounced Klasky Chupo. I know this because I interviewed Paul Germain, one of the co-creators of Rugrats, and he pronounced it as Klasky Chupo. So it's like, hey, he was he worked with Arlene Klasky and Gabor Chupo, so it's like he's the boss. He knows what he's talking about. So yeah, it's based off of their last names, and Arlene is Jewish and Gabor is Hungarian, so I know why they have kind of like those really funky last names. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent again. Continue.
It's okay. Oh, that's good to know, how to pronounce their names, actually. I just see so many of these reboots, and I feel like it can only work if the original people who worked on it first could actually continue it, because they know what they're doing, they know the characters well, they know what their fans want, and if somebody else were to come in and do it their way, it just wouldn't have the same feel.
Unless it was a person who was a huge fan of the show and they're able to do their own interpretations of it, like with Lauren Faust doing My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, or Ciara Neely doing the new TMNT cartoon.
Right, but that's always a hit or miss.
True.
You have to have somebody who really knows what they're doing, which is why I would really only trust the person who created a specific show. But if they can also find somebody who's a major fan and knows what they're doing, then I totally support it. But I wouldn't just let anybody touch as told by Ginger.
I understand. Just a few more questions. Are you now? Why, in your opinion, do you think that As Told by Ginger was overlooked for a very long time when it first came out?
Well, I think maybe it's because of the style. It was a comedy drama or a dramedy, and dramas were not really very popular on Nickelodeon just because they were too mature, and I guess kids really weren't ready to handle that kind of maturity, or they really just wanted to come home and see something funny and not have to think. Not that I'm undermining little kids, but most of the time they really just want to sit back and relax and watch something calm, and I would say maybe Ginger was too heavy at the time, or it didn't try as hard to make you laugh. It really tried to make you think, rather. So it's really just the style, I think. Kind of why some people, I guess, would be turned off by Courage the Cowardly Dog, which I was when I was little for the longest time. Just now I actually really started getting into it.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. I know a lot of people would really hate me for saying that, but I really used to hate Courage the Cowardly Dog, but now I'm really starting to appreciate it.
Don't worry, I was kind of like the same way with The Adventures of Pete and Pete, in which I liked it as a kid, but I never really understood it, because the atmosphere and the surreal humor just didn't get to me. And then when I watched it, like, many years later, I was like, wow, this is actually a smartly written show. I can be able to appreciate it a whole lot more. So, don't worry, we all have those one shows or movies or whatever in which we don't really understand it as kids, but then when we get older, we're able to look back on it and find something about it that we never saw before.
Right. And that's why I think people who are huge fans of Nickelodeon shows 10, 15 years ago should really go back and watch As Told by Ginger, just to give it a try.
Yeah.
And I think they would be pleasantly surprised to see that it's a pretty mature and deep show that they would really come to appreciate.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Are you starting to notice, like, a huge fandom of As Told by Ginger fans when posting your reviews?
Well, I do have a small group of fans of the blog who I communicate with on a weekly basis, and they're kind of the fandom that I know of. Other times I would notice the fandom on nreboot.com, where it's a site where you watch a bunch of old Nickelodeon shows, which is actually really great to find a community like that.
Yes, I have heard of Nick Reboot, yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice to have a little community of fans of the show like that, because they know the show well, and it's just easy to talk about.
Yeah, it is, definitely. All right, well, one final question. What personally for you, what did you take out of As Told by Ginger, both the show and your blog when posting about it?
The thing that I got out of it the most is that true talent really tends to be underrated. And it's just, you gotta look really hard to find really great shows, especially like As Told by Ginger. I think it's just more of a show that it was ahead of its time, and it's not something that you can really just gloss over like The Fairly Odd Parents or SpongeBob. It's the kind of show where you really have to watch it and really have to look at it to really understand what it's trying to convey.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm hoping that the splat will hopefully remind people about it, or we'll get a new audience to see it, and hopefully they'll appreciate it, as opposed to back 15 years ago, in which they pretty much ignored it. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who are getting into the old Nickelodeon shows, like a lot of the younger generation, and I was hoping for years that shows like As Told by Ginger would be airing on the 90s or all that, but now that they're airing on the splat, it's like, this gives me a hope that maybe someday people will actually look at this, and it's like, despite the fact that the animation's not great, there's a lesson to be learned. The characters mature and grow over time. There's a lot of interesting plot points that that feature. They talk about heavy subjects such as divorce and suicide, depression, addiction, romance. I can be able to learn something about it, and I can be able to relate to that. So I'm hoping that will happen. Maybe sometime down the line, maybe we'll be able to see we'll be able to see a resurface of fans coming in, and maybe it'll turn into a mainstream hit, like back when Rocko's Modern Life was an underground cult classic that back then was pretty much rejected because it was a Ren and Stimpy clone, but now people like it just as much, if not even more, than Ren and Stimpy. Or, something like, Firefly, in which, nobody watched it when it came out on Fox, and then people regard it as like one of the best sci-fi shows ever made. So who knows? We'll just see where the future lies.
Hopefully, if somebody sees As Told by Ginger now, they can get inspiration for newer shows that will come out on Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or Disney Channel, because we definitely need more of these slice of life cartoons.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Back in the 90s, that was like some of the most popular shows that they featured, the slice of life cartoons like Recess and Hey Arnold and Fillmore and Pepper Ann. So it would be nice if maybe, there would be something like As Told by Ginger that would be featured in for the new audience. I would love to see that.
Definitely. It will be a nice change of pace, too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right, well, that concludes this episode of Casual Chats. Michelle, do you have anything to plug or self-promote?
I just have my new blog, Hey Arnold Reviewed, that I just started a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of the sequel to As Told by Ginger Reviewed, so if anyone wants to check that out, you're more than welcome to. I'll be posting new reviews for new episodes every week, and keep checking back on As Told by Ginger Reviewed for new updates, new bonus posts. Watching.
All right. I can't wait to see what you're going to be posting for the 15th anniversary.
Oh, that's a secret.
I can't wait to see that. All right. Well, Michelle, once again, thank you so much for coming into this interview. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this episode of Casual Chats, and we hope to see you in the next one, so take care.